The attendees are coming in. Good afternoon, everyone. Apologies for the delayed start. My name is Tonian Robinson Beck. I am a consultant at MZN International. Welcome to today's webinar on 10 tips for strengthening your proposal budget. Please feel free to write in the chat your name and where you're from, and we'll get the webinar started very shortly. Thank you. Okay. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. I will be joined momentarily by my colleague, Stephen Rusk, who will be supporting me, in the question and answer segment. But give me a few seconds to get the presentation going. Okay. So can everyone see my screen? You can just type it in the chat if it's a yes or a no. Yes, awesome. Alrighty. So beginning today's presentation, like I said before, we'll be walking you through 10 key tips to, strengthen your proposal budget and get it ready for review and approval. So a little bit about us beforehand. MZN International is a social impact firm. We have been in operation since the early 2010s. And our goal is to just help NGOs to do better. So we support them in quite a few different tasks. We help them with finding funding opportunities, developing better strategies, ensuring they have strong community-led development approaches if that's what they want, and a variety of different services. As I said before, my name is Tonian Robinson Beck. I'm a consultant here at MZN, and that mainly means I just do project management. My colleague Stephen is online now. Hi, Stephen.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm Stephen. I'm an analyst for MZN. Most of my work revolves around project proposal writing and giving support to NGOs who are preparing proposals. Thank you.
Stephen. So Stephen and I will be answering any questions you have towards the end of the webinar. A little bit of housekeeping since it's just the two of us online. You can, once you are ready to ask your question, you can put it in the Q&A function, and I will attend to the question after the presentation, okay? If you are having any issues with the Q&A function, please signal that in the chat, and we'll do our best to get that sorted as quickly as possible. All right, so what will we be talking about today? So we'll be talking about preparing your budgets from start to finish, the value of a good budget, and how to meet donor requirements in a general sense. So what are some of the challenges with budget development? I'm sure everyone here has, had some challenge with developing a budget in the past. These could range from, issues with, unuser-friendly donor templates, or, team members are not responding timely for requested information, or it could be that the content of the proposal is not ready in time to give that, that allowable time to develop a detailed and comprehensive and clear budget. So this is a little bit of a statistic. Many budgets simply just don't make sense. And we have seen that somewhere around 30% of proposals failed because of their lack of clear budgets. To dive into that a little bit more deeper, it could be based on, incorrect calculations. The budget is too large or too small. It doesn't match what's in the TOR. It doesn't match what's in the narrative or the technical proposal. There are large contingency costs without explanation, or the donor templates are not used when they're expressly made to do so. But keep in mind that preparing budgets is equally as important as writing the technical parts. I know from my own experience, I usually leave the budget for last. And I know it's kind of a pervasive thought in the development sector that we'll get to the budget at the end, but it should get the same amount of effort and focus and attention as the narrative. So jumping into the 10 tips, you should treat your budget as a project and develop it as such. So you should have meetings with your proposal teams. You should ask questions meant to give those answers that connect directly with your budget development. So things like, is there an understanding of the size of the budget? What's allowable? Has there been any discussions with the donor for clarification? You should develop a project plan with a timeline. You should also build in time for budget review and approval, as well as inform all relevant stakeholders of the information requirements and the timeline. Moving on to point 2, you should get your template right. So we mentioned the donor template before. So if there is one, ensure that you use it. You should structure your budget as per the TOR and donor requirements. If there is no template, always use an Excel or Google Sheet to develop the budget and build in formulas to avoid calculation errors, and ensure that you get the currency right. So if it asks for US, use US. If it asks for Euro, use Euro. If it asks for local currency, use a local currency. And when you do use conversions, ensure that the date, website, rate of the source is reflected correctly. Okay, point number 3. Make sure the content is clearly reflected in the budget. So we mentioned before that your budget should match your proposal content, and it should match this at 100%. It should be telling the same story as a narrative. And donors usually want this information in a variety of different ways. They could ask for, all project activities to be costed. They could ask for it per phase of the project, per objective or outcome, or that it should be linked to general headers such as human resources, project-related admin costs, etc. So should we itemize by activity or line by line? So usually when there is no donor template, you have the opportunity to use either of these two, but once you make your choice, you should stick with it. Activity budgets would separate the program into a group of smaller activities. It's a little bit more logical to produce and follow. And it basically shows your intentions and is often more effective in communicating value for money. Line by line, on the other hand, places all expenses of the same type within the same line. And usually donor templates are kind of like this. It creates a quick overall picture of the costs associated with the program and enables the donor to see where the money is to be spent. Line by line can be a little less easy to follow. And it also poses the chance that you can miss certain items. So we do recommend that you start off by doing an activity budget first and then transpose that to a line by line if that's your preference. You can also just keep it as the activity budget. Number 5. So ask yourself some questions. So the program budget needs to answer the same questions as your proposal. So we have questions like, will the activity require supervision or oversight? When will the activities take place? Will there be travel? Will there be workshops, et cetera, et cetera? Will there be external parties who will need to support the completion of the project? So each of these questions have costs. And if they are not covered in your budget, then the donor will not pay for them. So you should, at the outset of your proposal development, answer these questions for both the proposal as well as the budget. Okay, we move on to direct or indirect expenses. So you should categorize these expenses differently. Usually donors have a policy. If it's not in the TOR, you can search for it in their financial guidelines, etc., that ensure you adhere to this guidance. Be sure to consider all expenses and categorize them appropriately, and be thorough and do not try to best guess expense items, as this will lead to financial challenges later in the project. Number 7, always reread what the donor wants. So check for these frequent errors. Have you exceeded the project budget? Is the currency not stated accurately? And indirect cost recovery. So check their policies and try not to deviate from what they stipulated. And if it's a case where what they're requiring you to include or exclude does not fit for your organization, then this might not be the opportunity or the donor for you. All right, when it comes to contingencies, we recommend that you avoid adding a bottom line percentage for these contingencies. Donors, as you know, do not like unclear or vague budget lines, and it's also not an accurate way of calculating a budget. If contingencies are needed, calculate a contingency amount for separate items in the budget. So if we go line by line, you may have a salaries budget, a salaries contingency or a fuel contingency, and ensure that every item in your budget is justifiable. So bottom line percentages are difficult to justify or monitor. Double, triple, quadruple check when you're composing your budget. So besides the formal approval process, ensure that formulas and calculations are checked by various people, ideally by at least one person that has not worked on the proposal, just to make sure it makes sense to someone who's not intricately involved. Make sure that you check that you meet all the donor requirements, especially when it comes to things like overhead costs, and that you have clear explanations. And check again that everything that has been said in the proposal, in the narrative, is reflected in the budget. And then make sure the numbers correspond to each other. Lastly, we have the value of a good budget. So a budget should be a tool to communicate with the donor. It can say a lot or a little depending on the level of detail and clearness of the budget, of the intention of your organization with a particular project. Good budgets have or demonstrate value for money. They show good capacity, compliance, skill, openness. So your task is to make sure that whatever you hope to do for this particular project is accurately reflected in the budget, not just the narrative, but also the budget. And we have come to the end. So these are a few of our training courses that we offer both in person and online. If you're interested, you can go to the website listed at the bottom and register. And that is the end of the presentation. Let me stop sharing. Thank you all so much. And I'll check if there are any questions in the Q&A function. No questions? Would it be better if, I don't know if people can unmute themselves, or you could raise your hand, and I would allow you to, oh, there's a question. Moving forward, if you're more comfortable in speaking, I could, allow you to speak. So you just have to raise your hand, and you would be able to answer your question. Okay, so how would you go about creating unit costs within the organization? So it depends on the project that you are compiling the budget for. We always stress that you should use past experiences to derive these unit costs. So for example, it could be number of hours to complete a donor mapping, for example, or maybe if it's a workshop, it would include things like material costs, supplies, and then the number of hours to complete a particular task. So it depends on the project or the initiative that you want to achieve. But you should really sit down and think about it, map it out line by line, like this would take X hours or this would take X amount of dollars, to make sure you have that reflected very clearly in your budget. Yeah. Anything to add, Stephen?
Yeah, I've got a few points
Yeah.
that might be useful. To make your narrative look really, really professional and link it with your budget, it helps when you are describing activities in your narrative to reference the relevant budget line. So your activity is to conduct a training, and you put in the budget line so that the evaluator could look straight to the budget and see, yes, training is there for X amount. Budget notes are really important to give justifications for your activities, your costs, your personnel, your travel. Activity budgets should be clustered around the results. If your project has 2 or 3 results areas, then the activities should be described within those results areas. For multi-year budgets, don't forget to include inflation. So for cost year 2 and 3, they should be more than year 1. Again, it just shows that you have thought about the project and its expenditure over the project period. And the other one I think really is really important is to include a spend forecast, at least for the first year of the project. What will be spent by when, and at which points might you be requesting the donor for the next tranche of the budget? I think all of this just shows that the budget isn't something separate from the narrative, but it's a part of it, and the budget helps the evaluator to see what it is the project's trying to achieve, what resources are needed, the overall cost, and the justifications for it, and how you will spend that money over the project period. Thank you.
Yeah, it's very insightful. So what Stephen is demonstrating, that even after you have secured a particular funding opportunity, you have to maintain that same level of attentiveness to detail with describing and outlining your budget, especially to ensure that you have a good working relationship with the donor. Thank you so much, Stephen. Are there any other questions? Feel free to raise your hand. I will allow you to speak. Or you can use the Q&A function that's at the bottom of your screen. Okay, we have a hand raised.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you, Abdul. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I just want to ask regarding the indirect cost. Is there a specific number that we should have in indirect cost, or it's based on the suggestions from the donor? Or if there is no suggestion from the donor, what percentage or what should be the number that we add, the percentage, I mean, in our budget?
Okay.
And
Well, go ahead.
and, another part, I'm sorry, regarding the narrative section, is there, although Stephen talked about it, should we talk about justification or no? There should be other details as well, like the costs and other details. And if you give some information about it, thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, we always urge our clients and partners that they should follow exactly what is stipulated by a donor. Usually the larger ones have these percentages for indirect costs outlined in their financial or funding disbursement guidelines. When it comes to a percentage, I would say to keep it under 10%. Stephen, would you agree? Or
again, these come out in the donor guidelines. Yeah, and I've known organizations where their indirect costs do exceed what the donor allows. And one way they try to get around this is to include some indirect costs into program activities and cover them from program costs. Which brings back to the second point of the comment about justifications. And it's really important to include budget notes as part of your narrative. And for every budget line, ideally, there should be an explanation.
Right.
For some donors, for the EU example, the justification sheet is part of the budget package. So every budget line has a corresponding justification line. For donors that don't provide that level of detail, then I would encourage you to include budget notes in your narrative. Again, it just makes for a more professional presentation, and it shows you've taken the budgeting seriously and matched it with the relevant activities and costs.
Yeah. So it's always important to have some justification or some reasoning behind the figures and the amounts that you've outlined in the budget. So where it's not stipulated by a donor in either a financial or funding disbursement guideline, you should use your good judgment. Try not to go too overboard with the indirect expenses and ensure that you always have justification for why you selected this amount for this particular item. Does that answer your question, Abdul?
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome. So we have 3 questions in the Q&A. The first one is, how does an evaluator judge a budget when more than 60% is salaries, as a project is mainly based in the expertise of staff? That is a project for conflict resolution. Okay. So if I'm understanding correctly, the project is based on capacity enhancement for staff. And you would want to know how this would be viewed by an evaluator to see if, 60% going to salaries is reasonable. Stephen, what do you think?
I think it can be reasonable if the project isn't so much activity based, but depends on the presence and funding for staff, then yeah, it should be justified. And the budget evaluator should be familiar with the call and the requirements that the budget is supporting. And perhaps in your narrative, it might help at some point to bring out why it is heavy on staff rather than activities, and then back to the justifications as well.
Right. So it depends on the situation, and you'd always have to justify it. So if this is the situation, it's capacity strengthening, and it involves staff, then I guess that would be reasonable and it can be justified. So it's just about how you rationalize and showcase that this is needed or this amount is required for this particular activity. Okay. Okay, another question from Sophia. So if the donor has no specific requirement about a budget template, which will be the criteria that you choose between a budget per concept of expense or an activity-based budget cost classified per outcomes. So it depends, it's completely up to you if there's no specific template. Like as I mentioned before in the presentation, activity-based budgeting is a little bit more easier to follow. Whereas, like a line by line would be a little bit less easier to follow. Not that it's not easy to follow, but less than the activity-based budget. And you have a higher chance of missing something. So it just depends on your preference, what you think would work better for you and your organization. But where there is no template, essentially, you can choose whichever option you want, as long as you ensure that your budget is clear, comprehensive, and is easy to read.
Yeah, I think the key word is clarity.
Yeah.
When the evaluator looks at it, is it clear from what they see, what you intend to achieve? And if they reference back to the narrative, are the lines justified by what's in the narrative?
Yep. Okay, so we have another question. So should contingencies and overhead costs be treated differently in project budgeting? Or should both be avoided as simple bottom line percentage add-ons? I think this leads back to the justification again, because it's not, the presentation was just outlining not to go too crazy with contingencies and overhead costs. But if you can justify these and if they're necessary for the successful completion of a project, then you should include it, because you need to outline as best as possible what you will need for a particular item, for a particular activity. And it's just, ensuring that you state this as clearly as possible and as logically as possible, that the donor and evaluators can understand why you need X. So yeah. Anything to add, Stephen?
Yeah, basically just to avoid lump sums like contingencies and overhead costs. And some donors, if you include contingencies and they accept them, they won't let you use the contingency line without their prior permission first. So you have your 5% contingency, and you reach a point in the project implementation, you want to spend it, you have to seek donors' permission to access that contingency line. But yeah, overall, provide detail rather than lump sum costs under simple headings like overhead costs or contingencies.
Yeah. Thanks, Stephen. So the final question is if we could show an example of our activity or line-by-line budgeting. I can't find an example right now, unfortunately. But if you are still interested after this webinar, you can share your email address with me in the chat function, and I'll get examples to you. Okay, so are there any other questions? Anything that wasn't clear from the presentation? Anything you would like to share from your own personal experience? You can either put it in the Q&A or you could raise your hand. I'd allow you to speak and we can have your input. Okay, I see no hands being raised and there are no questions in the Q&A. Giving a final call for questions or, contributions to today's session. Okay, all right. So if there are no other questions or contributions, I think we can take the chance to wrap up today's webinar. It was a pleasure to speak with some of you and, oh, wait, there is a question. Okay, so to the person interested in learning about activity versus line-by-line budgeting, I have your email address now, and I will contact you later today. And to the other person as well. Alrighty, so if there are any questions or anything else after I conclude today's session, then you can always send it to me via email. My email is tonyann@mzninternational.com. And I'd be happy to answer those for you. So thanks again to everyone. I hope you enjoyed today's session. It was relevant for you, and we will see you hopefully very soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.